It has now been more than 67 years since the American attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. These are the memories of children who survived. And for nearly 40 years at the United Nations, the vast majority of the world's peoples have called for the elimination of nuclear weapons. Yet even now, the United States and Russia alone still keep tens of thousands of weapons, thousands on hair-trigger alert. Other nations now have bombs, and more are seeking to acquire them. But with the advent of the Obama administration in the United States, it had seemed that at last the world might be moving back from the brink.
I state clearly and with conviction America's commitment to seek the peace and security of a world without nuclear weapons.
Expectations now were high for change. Now government leaders were applauding the renewed call to abolish nuclear weapons. And major documentaries were shown in advanced screenings here at the United Nations, calling for nuclear disarmament.
Various groups have been focused on acquiring weapons of mass destruction, in particular nuclear weapons.
The United States launched a rocket from Norway to study the Northern Lights. We told the Russians that we were going to launch that rocket, but somebody in Moscow forgot to pass word on it.
The Russians actually opened up the command and control launch codes, the button, put it on the desk, and said, "We're under attack." Fortunately, Yeltsin wasn't drunk, and he didn't believe what the military was telling him.
Obama went on to sign the START treaty with Russia.
We've taken important steps forward to increase nuclear security and to stop the spread of nuclear weapons. This starts with the reduction of our own nuclear arsenals. As the world's two leading nuclear powers, the United States and Russia must lead by example, and that's what we're doing here today.
Obama became the first United States president to chair the United Nations Security Council, calling for the abolition of nuclear weapons.
This very institution was founded at the dawn of the atomic age, in part because man's capacity to kill had to be contained. And although we averted a nuclear nightmare during the Cold War, we now face proliferation of a scope and complexity that demands new strategies and new approaches. Once more, the United Nations has a pivotal role to play in preventing this crisis. The historic resolution we just adopted enshrines our shared commitment to the goal of a world without nuclear weapons.
Among those reporting from the United Nations was the host of a new world student news service, Queen Noor of Jordan.
I have just left the United Nations Security Council special session on nuclear proliferation and disarmament. It was chaired by President Obama, the first ever Security Council session on that subject. And I have great news. The resolution passed unanimously, a resolution that paves the way for the world community to come together and work for a world free of nuclear weapons. It was my enormous privilege to be there as a representative of Global Zero and all of you who have worked so hard for a world free of nuclear weapons. But we have to keep the momentum going. Please tell everyone you know to go to globalzero.org to support our movement, to support their political leaders, to support the President and the other world leaders in completing this process of movement towards a world free of nuclear weapons.
From the very beginning of the worldwide effort to ban the bomb, one of the leading figures has been the former chairman of the United Nations Disarmament Committee and a Nobel Peace Prize nominee, Senator Douglas Roche of Canada. He is the author of Beyond Hiroshima and more than 20 other books on nuclear disarmament, including, most recently, How We Stopped Loving the Bomb. He is founding chairman of the Middle Powers Initiative and founding president of the Parliamentarians for Global Action, and he has recently completed a world tour to confer with world leaders, United Nations non-governmental organizations, and students in many countries. At the United Nations Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference in 2010, Senator Roche shared the worldwide hope and expectation for a new direction.
The arrival of Barack Obama in the White House is a transformational moment in international politics, the magnitude of which we have not seen since the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. We have a whole new way to approach nuclear weapons today. We've got to find ways to get to the people, and I think that President Obama cannot be expected to do all the heavy lifting and carrying all the water himself. He needs a tremendous outpouring of support from within the United States and also from the international community of like-minded states. I think this is a moment where we have to think anew about the ways in which we can mobilize people, and I believe that the end of nuclear weapons in our lifetime is something that people will understand and will follow if we can give them some leadership.
Senator Roche's optimism was shared by others, including leading celebrities among the UN non-governmental organizations.
I hope that many of you felt the thrill when this past April we heard the presidents of Russia and the United States say together, we committed our two countries to achieving a nuclear-free world. And as I listen to people who spent their entire life, and Senator Roche dealing with disarmament, I get the impression that in the last 60 years, and since the United Nations began dealing with this, that this is the time.
Now is the time to be bold. No one could have imagined a year ago that the presidents of Russia and the U.S. would openly state together that they intend to work to achieve a nuclear weapons-free world. But they did. Now is the time to work without cynicism, doubt, or fear.
But next year at the United Nations at the Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference, it had become obvious that progress would be slow and halting. There was angry impatience.
It can be done. Nuclear weapons can be banned. It is obscene that a handful of people in a handful of nations hold billions of lives in their hands. Where do they get that right? I don't want to be defended by nuclear weapons. I don't want a handful of men in my country telling me they are defending me with a weapon I do not want. The majority of the people on this planet do not want them. You have a mandate. Get rid of them now, not when Mr. Obama is dead.
We have seen no real actions or courageous leadership. So today, we ask once more for all states to begin real, honest, and fruitful negotiations leading to a nuclear weapons-free world. We do not want our governments to be in constantly hostile postures. We, the youth, and we, the people, want you to take us into account when you plan our future.
We need to debunk the utility value of nuclear weapons. As long as they have a utility value for one state, as long as they're a key to security of one state, it's a temptation to others that if you can secure your security by using nuclear weapons, why can't I?
And by the 2012 United Nations Preparatory Conference in Vienna, the disappointment was inescapable. This year, the 2012 Preparatory Conference of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty took place at the United Nations Center in Vienna, amidst distractions by the major weapon states concerned that Iran might get a bomb, and the awareness of the looming American elections. The election will determine the future of Obama's policy to seek a world without nuclear weapons. His Republican rival, Mitt Romney, says very little about nuclear disarmament, other than to say that a world without nuclear weapons is unrealistic. There were many action plans demands from non-governmental organizations and nation-states, urging the nuclear weapons nations to comply with their agreements, which in many cases for 40 years they have not. No assurances were given. There were long and thoughtful papers calling on the nuclear weapons states to move forward on reducing their nuclear arsenals and to end modernizing of nuclear weapons, and expressing concern that no steps were being taken. Alice Slater is founder of the global anti-nuclear movement Abolition 2000. She was at the conference in Vienna, and I asked her about the results. What, if anything, came out of that meeting?
Well, I think we're almost coming to the end of our belief that the Non-Proliferation Treaty Conference can accomplish anything. This was a treaty that was signed in 1970 by 5 nuclear weapon states, the U.S., Russia, China, France, and England, promising to give up their nuclear weapons if the rest of the world promised not to get them. And everybody signed this treaty except for India, Pakistan, and Israel. And they, of course, got nuclear weapons. And then North Korea took this other bargain in the treaty, which was to give everybody peaceful, so-called peaceful nuclear technology, which is literally giving them a bomb in the basement because every nuclear reactor is a potential bomb factory. So North Korea walked out of the treaty. So that's who we have now, these 9 countries. And here it is, you know, this treaty was signed in 75, so it's, you know, 36 years later, and there's still nuclear weapons pointing at each other from the U.S. and Russia. There are like 2,000 weapons on hair-trigger alert, ready to go off in minutes.
Leading the global call for the de-alerting by Russia and America of the thousands of weapons they still keep on hair-trigger alert is Ambassador Richard Butler, former UN Chief Weapons Inspector and Chairman of the Australian Canberra Commission on Eliminating Nuclear Weapons.
1,500 to 1,700 systems, missiles, on either side, on high alert, means this. If the radar screens tell you that the other side is starting to prepare, fueling their missiles or ready to prepare, it's called launch on warning, they're about to fire, then the guys sitting in the silos in Omaha have about 2 to 3 minutes to communicate that to Washington. The President of the United States has 4 to 5 minutes to decide what to do about it. And if those missiles are fired, they have a flight time of 30 to 40 minutes. Now, the question is why? What purpose does that serve? I beg you, why? Cold War was finished 20 years ago. Why, in the name of God, are we in that situation? I know some of the young men and women who sat there out in Omaha looking at those screens, and it nearly makes them crazy to think that a red light will flash and they have to start the procedure to do this. Why? Before we even get into the tougher business of getting rid of those missiles, disarmament on both sides, a key answer is this: take them off alert, switch it off, so that instead of 5 minutes to argue about it, you've got 5 hours. And that difference may sound small, but given the power of those weapons, it is infinity.
A terrifying warning of the real-world perils of nuclear hair-trigger policies comes in a forthcoming movie from Standard Films in Denmark, uncovering the long-suppressed story of Stanislav Petrov, the Russian commander of an early warning bunker, who, in a few agonizing, crucial minutes one night in 1983, made the decision to ignore procedure and not to sound the alarm to trigger a nuclear response to what he judged to be a false alarm. His judgment saved the world and ruined his life.
It's up to him to tell his leadership to launch a counterattack.
The film, The Man Who Saved the World, portrays in present-day interview and cinematic recreation the night of Cold War horror in the bunker.
I believe every person on the planet should know what happened, because every person was affected by your decision.
What a privilege to meet you, sir. The man who saved the world.
In 2006 at the United Nations, I was privileged to join in hosting an official award to Stanislav Petrov, formally declaring him the man who saved the world.
Colonel Petrov's wise judgment on September 26, 1983, averted a global catastrophe. As we celebrate and honor this brave and sane man, we should also realize that the risk has not gone away, and there are few Colonel Petrovs around.
I'm not a hero. I was just in the right place at the right time. I was just in the right place at the right time.
The Man Who Saved the World depicts a continuing threat. Mutual assured destruction. MAD. Mad. The subject of Stanley Kubrick's Strangelove. The delivery systems have changed. The madness remains. And so to Stanley Kubrick's haunting philosophical question, what to do now? I asked Senator Douglas Roche, whose latest book, How I Stopped Loving the Bomb, has neatly twisted the Strangelove title. I asked him why the Obama momentum to disarmament has slowed.
Why do you think that has happened? Is this a result of the immense power of the military-industrial complex in the American political system?
Well, I would want to give a lot of credit to President Obama for the comprehensive nature of his speech in the Prague when he pointed the way to a nuclear weapons-free world. And he followed that up right away by convening, for the first time ever, a meeting of the UN Security Council at the summit level, devoted exclusively to the subject of nonproliferation and disarmament. So that was an important move that President Obama made. And he showed there that he wants to get the international machinery moving. Now, with himself, he's surrounded by people in his own apparatus, if you will, who perhaps don't share fully the view of their own president. And thus, there is a dragging of its heels going on now in the United States that we'll have to wait and see whether a re-elected Obama can change that in 2013. I take some considerable comfort in the fact that Ban Ki-moon has already been re-elected to his second term, and he was the first Secretary General to go to Hiroshima and to bring the full weight of the United Nations authority to the subject when he put out his 5-point proposal for nuclear disarmament. So leaders can only go as far as the traffic, will sustain them, and we have to wait and see what Obama will be able to do.
What ideally would you hope he would do if he has a second term?
Well, I want to see a start made on comprehensive negotiations for a nuclear weapons convention. We need a global legal ban on all nuclear weapons. We need one law for all states, one law for all peoples. In the international community that has now developed as a result of globalization, to me it is illogical. It makes no sense that we built up all the factors that make up globalization, the scientific, the transportation, the communications, everything that makes our world today, and has enabled us to rise up. And we can't develop a law to protect that which we have developed from utter destruction from a nuclear weapon. I have just finished a speaking tour of 23 Canadian universities on the subject of nuclear weapons, and I put that very question to them. And young people today, they get it when they think about this issue. Most young people don't think about nuclear weapons. But when they do, when it's brought to their attention, they get the connection between nuclear weapons and human rights. That is to say, if we're trying to develop and implement human rights in all their aspects as the 21st century continues, then we have to do something about a force that would destroy the very human rights we're trying to protect.
One would hope, of course, that America would be the nation that could and should take the lead here, but the political paralysis that can sometimes occur. Do you think that some other nation or group of nations may really move ahead on this?
I think that the United States is an extremely important country and will be for some time to come. But its relative position in the world is coming up against the ascending states of China and India and Brazil and a few others. And thus, as time goes on, the voice of America will be, while important, will not be the deciding voice as such. So I look to other states now, particularly in the nuclear weapon states. We look to the United Kingdom, we look to China, to start to take some leadership. And I was in both countries on a recent trip around the world where I presented the Middle Powers Initiative brief on a global ban on nuclear weapons to officials and leaders in those countries. And I find that they are at least thinking about the subject.
In nation-state parliaments, moves are underway to support the UN call for a nuclear weapons convention to ban the bomb. In New Zealand, Dr. Kennedy Graham, a former diplomat and advisor to the UN Secretary-General's office, and who had earlier helped formulate New Zealand's nuclear-free Pacific policy, now heads the New Zealand Green Party in Parliament, where he formally introduced the UN resolution.
Will New Zealand promote immediate negotiations on a nuclear weapons convention prohibiting their development, production, stockpiling and use?
Speaker. The Honourable Murray McCulley. I'm advised that the prospects of successfully negotiating such a treaty at the present time would be poor. For that reason, at government level internationally, there are no serious moves afoot to get negotiations on a convention underway.
Supplementary.
Dr. Kennedy Graham.
Given our nuclear-free policy and the fact that a convention is supported by the UN Secretary-General as a practical plan, now, not in the future, should we not support all resolutions calling for the convention and a nuclear-free world generally?
The Honourable Murray McCulley. Speaker. What I can say is that amongst the steps that New Zealand is taking in the short term to reduce nuclear dangers attending the world is the outstanding leadership that the Prime Minister brought to the nuclear summit held recently in Seoul.
Defeat was predictable, but the issue is raised, and the symbolism and the intent are revealing. Obama's promise of disarmament faces the great challenge of statecraft to change course without swerving. He has changed course. He has not swerved. They have been the first small steps on what will be a long journey. Thousands of nuclear weapons are still on hair-trigger alert. Billions of dollars are still invested in making more bombs. The United States is increasing funding in Los Alamos for further nuclear bomb production. And around the planet, lethal nuclear wastes accumulate. We have been bad ancestors. We have created unverified, uncounted thousands of nuclear bombs and left them on hair-trigger alert. We have burdened all foreseeable future generations with a deadly legacy of nuclear wastes with no place to put them. The people of Japan have suffered uniquely from the nuclear age. Struggling back now from the disaster of nuclear power, they remain the only victims of the deliberate use of nuclear weapons. Those events forever burned into human memory, and may yet serve to hold the human race back forever from a repetition. The images by the children preserves that memory, and each year we will remember Hiroshima and Nagasaki.